take number 18. We ran into some people who have a place at the beach, and this was in July, and they were complaining that where the Wi-Fi was slow where they lived. And so the first thing I said was, you're living in a house. I don't think your Wi-Fi is the problem. Unless you have a lot of people coming over? No. Okay, well, let me think about what this really means. When people say my Wi-Fi is slow, our Wi-Fi is slow. The one that's an interesting one is everybody's Wi-Fi is slow. So let's talk about what that might mean in a private dwelling situation. Not talking about an office, not talking about a hotel. So one of the questions is, how does your device talk to the internet? If the internet's the internet information superhighway, which in a lot of ways it is, with a lot of places you can get to on it, and a lot of people, millions, billions of people sharing it with you, it's getting from your neighborhood street onto the main drag in town, and then getting to the on-ramp and getting onto the superhighway. A lot of times, those are the places where you have problems. So how does your device talk to the internet? Your Wi-Fi router basically surrounds your house with a cloud of service. And that cloud of service is stronger the closer you are to the hub, and it's stronger if you have fewer devices, because the devices actually argue with each other a little bit in that cloud space. And they use up the shared bandwidth. And things like streaming really eat bandwidth. If you're doing regular internet, man, life is great. But if you're going to do streaming and other things that are high bandwidth and require high quality of service, then you're stealing service from the other people in the building, the other people in your cloud. If you have enough set up, then everybody can do this. But you could also steal service from anybody dropping from your house onto the neighborhood ISP. And this is why a lot of times the ISPs will say, how many streaming devices are you going to have? This connection supports this many streaming devices. So your device talks in your cloud to your hub. Your hub joins the hardwire connections for your TV, your cable box, other things, drops that onto the neighborhood, then drops that on the higher bandwidth connections to the ISPs, which drop into the higher bandwidth onto the backbone. Now, in some cases, just like the neighborhood street at rush hour, you can't get out of your neighborhood because there's a stop sign. Certain ISP provider types actually share bandwidth in the neighborhood. Everybody doesn't get their own exit to the neighborhood. They all roll out to the main drag. And if you've got a big neighborhood, you can have a lot of people waiting at the stoplight at the beginning of the neighborhood to get out. And that's the same thing that can happen. You got to look at what kind of service you've got. So one of the things, is it Wi-Fi? The main place you end up with Wi-Fi problems is because you have overlapping. I have a Wi-Fi cloud around my domicile. Everybody else in their house or their townhouse or their apartment has a Wi-Fi cloud surrounding their domicile, and they overlap each other. Everywhere they overlap, it's conflict if they're using it. If you're the only one home and everybody's got their stuff turned on, then there's no Wi-Fi conflict, and your Wi-Fi is not slow. If you're slow, then it's a different problem. You got other issues. If it's after work and the neighborhood's full and everybody's got their own Wi-Fi connection, and on your phone you can see 6 different Wi-Fi connections, then it might be a Wi-Fi problem. But it could still be a neighborhood problem. It could be that there's not enough bandwidth provisioned out of the neighborhood. And when I say that, because the internet in a lot of cases is shared bandwidth. So not only do Wi-Fi clouds overlap each other potentially, like I said, if you're in a neighborhood of individual houses, that's probably not a problem. If they're super close together, or they're apartments, then it might be a problem. In fact, it's almost always a problem because there are so many Wi-Fi devices or dorms where everybody sets up their own Wi-Fi when they're not supposed to, right? But the main things that affect speed, your performance, one of them is shared bandwidth. Wi-Fi shares bandwidth. Your clouds overlap, that's shared bandwidth. When you join the neighborhood hub, you're on shared bandwidth from that neighborhood to the ISP. In some neighborhoods, like cable, you may actually share bandwidth in the loop in the neighborhood. So you might actually have like little stop signs at the end of everybody's driveway where they have to wait for the neighbor to go by. If you're on something like Fios, everybody has like a straight shot to the stoplight at the front of the neighborhood. So you have shared bandwidth. That can be an issue. In that case, it may or may not be Wi-Fi. The other thing you've got that'll affect performance is how good a connection does your ISP, how close are they to the internet? How close are those services to you? If you're in Hawaii, that's a bad one. If you're in California and your service provider and your company you're connecting to only has an East Coast location, you will never get better than certain performance. It's probably fine, but you'll never get better than certain performance because the speed of light, you got to go from the West Coast to the East Coast. So there are certain limits. And that's why some companies like the streaming providers will actually put their streaming technology inside the ISP. They're bringing it closer to you. So you've got speed. How many bits per second did I ask for? What's my latency? And Wi-Fi has always higher latency than wired. And do I have higher latency because the services I'm going to are farther away? Or am I having conflicts on the ISP's backbone because they didn't provision enough, right? The more high bandwidth streaming users you got, the worse everybody else's service. The more they have to over provision. Think of it like rush hour. You got like 6 lanes going to work. If I'm not going to work, I'm like, man, there's like 6 lanes here. What's the point? But when it's busy, suddenly all those lanes are full. The internet's sort of the same way. So I ran into this with a beach thing. The beach population is 5 times the average, no, the low season population. That means the average is 2.5 times. The ISP probably builds for average or median. So the performance is going to be great for 9 months of the year in the beach community. Has nothing to do with Wi-Fi. It might if you're living in a townhouse neighborhood and suddenly everybody brings their kids with devices in the summer. But the backbone probably isn't provisioned for the summer burst traffic, right? They want to get the cable to be good, but man, all that other stuff, if you're like 5 times the population and the thing's size. So it could be you get bad performance because you're in a transient area where the bandwidth needs to actually change. So traffic, congestion, quality of service. You just got to realize you pay for bandwidth. You got to know, but you don't know whether that bandwidth is shared with other people. You have Wi-Fi, but if your Wi-Fi cloud overlaps somebody, then it doesn't matter what bandwidth you pay for. You're not actually going fast enough to make use of that pipe onto the neighborhood link. Also, the more latency sensitive devices like streaming, the worse everybody else's service is going to be. So I tried to come up with this. The easiest way to figure out if it's your Wi-Fi or something else, if you have a problem, plug the device into a hardwire connection. If no problem goes away, it's the Wi-Fi. You got a streamer stick and you don't get very good reliable service, buy an Ethernet thing, plug it into a hardwire, see if the problem goes away. If it does, you got a Wi-Fi problem. If it turns out you and all your neighbors have the same problem and you're in houses, then it's not a Wi-Fi problem. You got a hub problem somewhere in the neighborhood. We had a situation where half of our cable boxes were out, so all the loops weren't working. And so people were jammed onto stuff. The system was doubly redundant, but it had no redundancy anymore. So the first 2 boxes are easy. Ethernet hardwire fixes it, it's the Wi-Fi. You got a problem with your neighbors. Non-adjacent locations are impacted. Different places in the same neighborhood are far apart, not the Wi-Fi. Everything else is harder. Variable by season, God, I don't know. Could be Wi-Fi, might not be. It's only when everybody is home at night, might be Wi-Fi, or might be under provisions in the neighborhood loop. So that's really it. When somebody says, is it the Wi-Fi or something else, ask a couple questions, and you might get a different answer. You might be able to figure out what the issue is. Buying a new Wi-Fi hub or complaining about the Wi-Fi might actually be the wrong answer. I hope this helped. Sorry it ran so long. Leave feedback if you think it was too technical or not technical enough.